It's time for Myth of the Week.
All right, I really appreciate the participation this week. I hit such high numbers on just all the people jumping in, and it's funny because anytime anybody sees these things, they just freak out because they're made by Wago. But to me, I don't think it's a big deal. I've heard of people actually cutting these out of fixtures before and wire nutting them because they didn't think they made a good connection. You're not going to have any problems with these things. Like I say, if they're a part of a factory assembly, I would just leave them in place. I wouldn't cut them out. That's just me personally. But they could come back. The listing and the fixture manufacturer could come back and say you voided the listing of that fixture by cutting those out and not using them. To me, I just think it's silly. Like if you have obviously 4 or 5 conductors that you have to splice and stuff, by all means cut them out. Now, I ran in. This is real interesting. The way that this myth is written, this is true based on the code change from 41071 on the 2023 reference. But in all actuality, I'm going. There's some interesting developments with this code change. For 2023, they actually added LED to this. I actually don't really agree with this code change. I don't really like it. Like I say, I think that there's a lot of ways that the National Electric Code needs to evolve kind of towards the future, and I think this brings us back a little bit. I don't really like it for the fact that it was designed for maintenance men to be able to safely disconnect the driver or the ballast and change it while energized, which obviously isn't an electrically safe work condition. They're saying that it puts the fixture in electrically safe work condition if you have that fixture disconnect, which that could be a good thing. But at the same time, we're moving towards these luminaires that don't have drivers or don't have that stuff, which you wouldn't need a disconnect. So even though this statement is true, you wouldn't need to have those disconnects installed. And the reason I came across this was one of the guys cut one off and threw it on the ground, and they're like, "Hey, what are you doing? You can't take those off. It's code, And so yeah, it's true. It is code, but at the same time, you're gonna have to look at all the exceptions that could make this to where you don't need these. And I was talking with the inspector about this, and he said, man, he goes, with all those exceptions in there and everything, he goes, that would be really hard to enforce. He's like, I'm not going to go into every fixture and make sure they put disconnecting means in there. And one of the ones that I don't even know if it's even mentioned in there, but when you look at the manufacturer instructions, it says this fixture contains no serviceable parts. And so when I saw that, I was like, wow, you wouldn't even really need a code change if that Luminaire says no serviceable parts. Then basically what they want to do is they don't want you to chop in a fixture, a disconnecting means in there. What they want you to do is if you have any issue with that fixture, they want you to take it out of the ceiling, put it in a box, send it back to them, and reinstall a new fixture. And they actually did this to one of the jobs I had, and they actually sent me new fixtures, and I basically just took the drivers, replaced the drivers, put the burnout drivers back in the fixtures they sent me and sent them back. So basically all they had to do was replace the drivers. But at the same time, it's kind of an interesting thing we get into on this. And I know James, like he was I saw a little twinkle in his eye when I said, "Oh yeah, this is there's a couple good examples to be learned from this code change," and I'll get your take on it, James. But I really appreciate you putting this together.
Well, other than what you've already stated, you have the main change, okay, and exactly what you stated here and talking about the drivers and everything, and they're basically just telling you here that if you're in other dwellings and and associated accessory structures. That when you have these fluorescent LED luminaires that do utilize these double-ended lamps and they contain ballast and LED drivers and such, that they can be services that will have a different Luminaire. That's a true statement, and there are exceptions. I read some said, "Oh, this question is stupid. There's exceptions." It's, well, yeah, there are exceptions, but he asked you exactly the general rule that was here, and that is the general rule in 410.71. He didn't put any exceptions to it or anything like that. So when you come over here and look at this, these are your 4 exceptions. Okay, now. One of the things, this gets into, is you have to look at the listing and labeling of the equipment. And I've stated this over and over, and I'm going to prove this fact tonight because, I don't know who did it, but I know Jeffrey Bauer, he come in and said, send this link over to these 2 idiots, which he was referring to us, where they were talking about, does the manufacturer's instructions overrule the NEC? And they did a Zoom call. They didn't even do a thing, where the video is going to be out there. So basically it was self-contained. If they recorded it, I dang sure couldn't find it. But I looked at this and I said, okay, well, let's just go and let's just take a look and tie all of this in. Now, I want to point this out. I want to give some history before I get into all of this stuff. Okay. Now, when you go back and you look back in 1971, and we had the code skipped to 1975. Okay. Now, what I hear is them saying OSHA is a safety standard. It is. But there's also stuff in there. You go look at 1910.302 through 308 and then go look at the definitions of 1910.399. They almost mirror exactly what the code says. Now, why is that? Okay, there has to be a reason why. Because when you look before the 1971 NEC, what was the NEC mainly? What did it cover? It covered residential.
Protected persons and property.
It mainly did residential than it did anything. So what happened was OSHA went to the National Electrical Code, or NFPA, shall I say, and they said, look, if you want us to look at adopting your standard as an ANSI standard and recognized by OSHA, you're going to have to come in and start putting commercial industrial in here. So what happened was, before they do that, that's why we skip 4 years. And if you go back and look, you'll start seeing all this commercial industrial start coming into play. Okay. Now that's how it started. And when you go back and you look at the OSHA document in subpart S, it's going to give you 2 dates. It's going to say March the 15th, 1972. I think that's the right date. Any equipment installed before then is grandfathered in. Okay. Then from March 15th, 1972 to April 16th, 1981. Now, isn't that funny how those start lining up together when you start looking at 71, 75, and 78, 81? They basically said in that portion there that anything that was installed in there will be brought up to the current code if there's 50% or more work that was changed within the facility. And everything after 81, whatever the code was at that time, it was brought up to that code cycle. Okay?
Yeah, and there's one valid point that you bring up about the grandfather clause. A lot of people talk about that, and it's not really explained too much. So basically what that says is if it was considered to be up to code at that time,
that's right.
Kind of like what we were talking about with the child that lost his life on the AC unit back in 2007. If you could just like leave your conductors hanging out of boxes and leave the covers off and stuff in let's just say 1990s or something, then they would have not considered that to be a code violation with a 20-foot piece of seal tight that's used as equipment ground and covers hanging open and all kinds of stuff that was not in good repair. that kind of stuff would be considered a grandfather clause because you didn't need box covers in 1999 or whatever year.
I'll take it
So
even a step further. We got millions upon millions upon millions of AC units installed across the United States. Where are all these deaths at?
yeah,
You know,
uh,
that's where I come into my point. If it is such a burden where it doesn't protect persons and property, why are we not going back putting GFCIs on all these AC units or figuring out a way to take care of that? Because they don't have that technical merit to do that. And
yeah. And I mean, why don't we force the manufacturer to put steel cages around them so kids can jump on them?
that's right. There's a reason. All right. Now, with all that said, knowing exactly how all of it started and took place, now we need to look at some of the definitions here. Okay.
True.
Now, when you go and look, and I'm just going to do the newest version of NEC and OSHA and everything. So when you look at 2023 NEC and you go to Article 100, it talks about equipment that is identified. Okay. And it says recognized as suitable for the specific purpose, function, use, environment, application, and so forth were described in a particular code requirement. Now, it's automatically telling me, like if I had an AC unit out there, that when they come in and they identify this and they start doing the listing and labeling and everything for this, it was identified at that point based on the environment it was going to be installed in.
True.
Okay? And then it gives you an informational note. And it says, some examples of ways to determine suitability of equipment for a specific purpose, environment again, or application include investigations by a qualified testing laboratory, which is your listing and labeling, an inspection agency, or other organizations concerned with product evaluation. Now,
Right.
I'm going to get into a little bit, and I'm going to show you that UL does take into consideration the National Electrical Code or any other pertinent standards before they put any listing and labeling on these pieces of equipment. So if it's listed and labeled, then it's already taken into consideration for GFCI protection. Okay?
Yeah, and any other applicable codes too.
That's right. And if the manufacturer comes in and tells you no GFCI protection, guess what? They've already considered the specific purpose, function, use, and environment and application of that piece of equipment. Okay? So let's look at what is considered listed. It talks about equipment, materials, or service that are included in a list published by an organization that is acceptable by the authority having jurisdiction, or those concerned with product evaluations of product or services. That means you got UL, ETL, FM, and so on. All right. And then it says they also maintain periodic inspection of production as they're doing production of these pieces of equipment that is listed for periodic evaluation of services and whose listing states that either the equipment, material, service meets, now listen here, meets appropriate designated standards or has been tested and found suitable for a specific or specified purpose.
Sure.
Okay. So once again, they're telling you that they met specific here, appropriate designated standards, and it's been found suitable for this specified purpose. So when I look at the information note, it says the means for identifying the listed equipment may vary for each organization concerned with product evaluation, some of which do not recognize equipment as listed unless it is also labeled. So now we'll just look and see what is labeled. So when I look at label, all it tells you is you got this equipment and it has attached to it a label, symbol, or other identifying mark of an organization that is acceptable to who? The authority having jurisdiction and concern with product evaluation, and basically says the same thing. And it says, and by whose labeling the manufacturer indicates, listen to this, compliance with appropriate standards or performance in a specified manner. Now, that goes in, and that, in my opinion, that covers it right there. But I'm not done there, because I'm going to tie the rest of this in. And I'm going to show in black and white where what I'm stating is true here. Okay.
Well, and the testing laboratory actually pays inspectors to go and inspect their lines and all their assembly lines and make sure that they're using the right products, make sure they're coming from the right, like doing everything that they submitted for that listing, that they're not cutting corners, that they're not doing something that they said they weren't doing or whatever. Like, because I've seen that before. I've worked in assembly areas before, and they have inspectors come in there and just make sure they're using the proper materials, they're grounding them correctly, they're doing everything correct. So they actually have inspectors that are inspecting these inside the factory before they're even coming out.
Right. And let's see what it says here when it gets into the installation and use, because it's going to prove exactly what I just stated in the definitions for identified, listed, and labeled. It says equipment that is listed, labeled, or both, or identified for use shall be installed, and what does it say here? And used in accordance with any instructions that are included in that listing, labeling, or identification. It
True.
literally tells you to do it. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's where I have a problem with this. Now, let's go down, and I'm not going to read the informational note there. It's just where you can download the instructions. But then you get into the listing. And it says product testing, evaluation, and listing, which is your product certification, shall be performed by recognized qualified testing laboratories and shall be in accordance with applicable product standards, recognized as achieving equivalent and effective safety for equipment installed to comply with what? This code, the National Electrical Code. So it's literally telling you, anybody that argues that and says that the manufacturer's instructions are, that's a lie, because it literally tells you right here that it provides, it achieves a equivalent and effective safety for equipment installed to comply with this code. So if a manufacturer tells you no GFCI, that stops. But hold on, I'm on a roll now. Now,
Right.
look at the informational note. Then it talks about who? OSHA. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, I've heard Jeremy and Jeffrey Bauer and Ted Fritz, all these know-it-alls. They come on and they're telling you OSHA has nothing to do with it. Well, if that's the case, why is OSHA even recognized here? Okay?
True.
Well, I just gave you an intro to why it does, and I'm going to show you why it does. Now it says OSHA recognizes qualified electrical testing laboratories that perform what? Evaluations, testing, and certification of certain products to ensure that they meet the requirements of both construction and general industry OSHA electrical standards. Now, what that means is you're either looking at subpart S, that'll deal with general industry, and if you're looking at construction, you're going to be looking at subpart K. All right?
Okay.
Then it tells you if the listing, the product certification is done under a qualified testing laboratory program. This listing mark signifies that the tested and certified product complies with the requirements of one or more appropriate product safety test standards.
Right.
Now, looking at that, that gives us everything we need to know there, and then you drop over to approval, and it says the conductors and equipment permitted or required here by the code shall be acceptable only if approved. And what did it tell us to do? It said the authority having jurisdiction, which if you go look at the definition of approved, that's where you pick it up. Okay? So
Right.
Now, with that in mind, let me go back here one. You're going to notice here in the informational note, it's going to tell you when you get in looking at the examination of equipment for safety, it has 110.3 here for your examination, identification, and solution of equipment, what we just did, and also the definitions. And then it tells you for examination of equipment for safety to see 90.7. Now, as you can tell, I've tied in all these definitions all back and forth through Article 110 back to Article 100. Okay?
Right.
Now, let's look at 90.7. And it talks about examination of equipment for safety. And it says, for specific items of equipment and materials referred to in this code, okay, examinations for safety made under standard conditions provide a basis for approval where the record is made generally available through promulgation by organizations properly equipped and qualified for what? Experimental testing, inspections of the runs of goods at factories, the service value determination through field inspections. Oh,
Right.
so what you're telling me now is they go out and they actually do field inspections like on this AC equipment or EVSE, and if they say no GFCI protection, now you're going to tell me the code overruns this, even though the examination of equipment for safety gives you permission as a qualified testing laboratory to do this?
Sure.
I mean, I'm just showing you the code and what it says for here. But look at this. Then I drop down, and what does the information load? It tells me to see what? 110.3B. There you go. And then Article 100 for listed and reconditioned, which goes back to, like I said, you have to have something substantial. That's why they have in there now a new section, and they say boxes can't be what? Reconditioned. Remember?
Oh, no, outlets.
Or outlets. Outlets can't be reconditioned. I mean, it's specific. It calls it outlets. So, I'm not making anything up. And I'm really not even giving an opinion here. I'm showing you exactly what it says. And anybody that disagrees with this, all you have to do is just follow what I'm showing you here and show me where I'm wrong. Okay.
Awesome. We got Mr. G up in the house. Oh, thanks for joining,
Hey,
Mr. G. What a treat. Awesome. So I have a really funny story about this, James. So I always check out the manufacturer instructions, and I always try to point out quirky things that they say in them. And there was a light it was a Luminaire. I shouldn't say light. It was a Luminaire that we're installing, and it said in 110.3b, the manufacturer instructions said these manufacturer instructions should be handled while installing the fixture. So it's it's a code violation to not be holding the instructions when you're trying to put it in.
Oh yeah, I remember that. All right, now, there's a new section that they did for 26 that's coming. I'll post it back up again on ECD for Awesome Electrician. I can even post it over in your group if you want me to, David.
Yeah, David. It basically says that outlets are not permitted to be reconditioned.
Yeah. Now, here's OSHA 1910.399. What does it say? They have accepted, but they also have another definition, which is acceptable. Okay? And it talks about an installation or equipment is acceptable to the Assistant Secretary label and approved within the meaning of this subpart S. This is general industry because we're in subpart S. And number 1 says, if it is accepted or certified or listed or labeled or otherwise determined to be safe by a national recognized testing laboratory. Now, we're going to get in a little bit. We're going to look at custom-made equipment also in Pren 3 here. But in 2, it says, with respect to an installation or equipment of a kind. Now, listen to this. That no national recognized testing laboratory accepts, certifies, lists, labels, or determines to be safe if it is inspected or tested by another federal agency or by a state, municipality here, or other local authority responsible for enforcing occupational safety provisions, look at here, of the National Electrical Code and found in compliance with the provision of the National Electrical Code as applied in this subpart. So what they're telling you here is, if I'm an inspector, I can come in and look at this, and if I want to take that responsibility, I wouldn't do it. But you could be the local authority that looks at that and says, you know what, we determined it's safe and everything. We don't want no GFCI protection on it. Guess who wins? You're the authority having jurisdiction. So these guys telling you have to put that GFCI. No, you don't. I'm just telling you, you don't have to.
That's so funny, David. That's exactly what we said.
It says outlets, not receptacle outlets.
Yeah.
Now, with this in 3, it says, now watch this, with respect to custom-made equipment or related installations that are designed, fabricated for, and intended for use by a particular customer, if it is determined to be safe for its intended use by the manufacturers on the basis of test data which the employer keeps and makes available for inspection to the assistant secretary and his authorized representatives. Now, they're telling you, and this is a good example. I do a lot of stuff for the oil and gas industry. I'm going to tell you, they know more than UL does on that. And UL, they may come out and want UL to put a field applied label on there. That's perfectly fine, but they'll probably work with the manufacturer. If the manufacturer, for instance, they say, you don't need GFCI protection on that. And they are the authority having jurisdiction there that fabricated and put all this stuff together to get this on there. UL is going to look at it with the National Electrical Code, see what the requirements are. And if they say no GFCI protection, guess what? No GFCI protection.
So, yeah, and so I just want to catch up Juan a little bit. I did a myth of the week. So what happened was there was a guy at my job site and he threw one of the quick connects that go for the drivers. We're doing a whole bunch of linear fixtures and he was cutting out the little quick disconnects for the drivers because we had like multiple switch legs we were trying to tie in. And he says, hey, you can't throw those on the ground. You have to install those. That's code. And so I decided to run this for the myth of the week. And basically my point is that if the manufacturer instructions say that there's no serviceable parts in that Luminaire, then that overrides the NEC, which would be a reference of 41071 in the Stallcup's Illustrated Code Change Book. Page 428. If you're going to look at the your Stallcup's book right now, Juan, you would go to page 428. So
yeah, that's in 428. That just shows you how many changes we covered. Most of them out there, they cover about 100. I think we covered 218 or something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, dude, it's a good book, dude. I love it.
Then let's look at the definition of accepted. It says an installation is accepted if it has been inspected and found by a national recognized testing laboratory. Now listen to what it says here. To conform to specified plans or to procedures of applicable codes. They're telling you here that when they're coming in, they're listing, labeling and stuff, that they're looking at the National Electrical Code when they make these decisions. But just to prove that, right up here, you're going to see in the definition of acceptable, Prin 1, it says nationally recognized laboratory recognized pursuant to what? 1910.7. Okay, so let's look at 1910.7. And when you go over and pick up that part of OSHA, it talks about the definitions and requirements for a nationally recognized testing laboratory. Okay, so what are the laboratory's requirements here? It tells you in 1910.7b there, it says the term National Recognized Testing Laboratory, we call NERTL, means an organization which is recognized by OSHA in accordance with Appendix A of this section, and which tests for safety and lists or labels or accepts equipment or materials in which meets all the following criteria, which we're going to get into here in just a second. But I want to point out what it says here, in which tests for safety. Okay, and that's what I'm trying to state here. If a manufacturer comes in and they look at the equipment and they say no GFCI protection, they have looked at this equipment knowing that it provides the necessary safety there in order to protect personnel. They have to look at the National Electrical Code before they state something like that. But let's go a little bit further and let's see what it says. B1, for each specified. Oh, wow. Thank you, David. That's what I'm saying. You know, a lot of times people look at things and they just assume this, and this, but you got to look at other things. And, you know, Dad and I have done classes on custom made equipment where we go in, we don't only deal with OSHA and the National Electrical Code, but we also deal with NFPA 79. And we go through, and I could have tied some NFPA 79 in this too to show exactly what they're talking about here. But this, I think this covers it fairly well, in my opinion. But in B1, it says, for each specified item of equipment or material to be listed, labeled, or accepted, The NERDL has the capability, including proper testing equipment and facilities, trained staff, written testing procedures, and calibration and quality control programs to perform. So when they do all of this, they're doing testing and examining of equipment and materials. Now listen to what it says: for workplace safety purposes to determine conformance with appropriate test standards. And then it says experimental testing and examining of equipment materials for workplace safety purposes to determine conformance with appropriate test standards or performance in a specified manner. And then it drops in, and then it talks about what the NERDL shall provide. And it says, it shall provide to the extent needed for the particular equipment or materials listed, labeled, or accepted the following controls or services. It says implements control procedures for identifying the listed and labeled equipment or materials. It inspects and runs production of such items at factories for product evaluation purposes to assure conformance with the test standards, and conducts, now look at here, now listen to what it says, conducts field inspections to monitor and assure the proper use of its identifying marker labels on products. Now, let me just say this, and I'm just going to go with the EVSE here. If I have an EVSE unit and they say no GFCI protection, we already provide that. And therefore, I'm going to hardwire it in. Why are you stating now I still have to put Class A protection on it? They've already looked at this, and they've done, here they tell you, they have done what? Field inspections. They know the equipment is good. Therefore, they don't need the GFCI protection. The personnel protection, they've already provided it. Now, how would the NEC override something like this when UL, ETL, FM, or whoever is doing this? They actually even do field inspections to determine that that protection's already been provided. Okay? Sure. Now,
hey, James.
Awesome.
Sorry. Just real quick, though. David was wondering, he says his apology, I missed where it says outlets cannot be reconditioned, and he's wondering if that's a 2026
yes.
public input.
Yes, it is. It's already, unless it was unanimously accepted, and I doubt when it gets to the comment stage it's going to be deleted. But I will post it up for you to look in. As a matter of fact, I may try to find it here, and then I'll bring it up before the podcast is over when he's doing some of his other stuff.
Thanks for jumping in, Giants fan. Really appreciate you showing up. Always awesome having you jump in.
Okay, now let's look at B3. The NERDL is completely independent of employers subject to the tested equipment requirements and of any of the manufacturers of vendors or of equipment or materials being tested for these purposes. And the NERDL maintains effective procedures for what? Producing credible findings or reports that are objective and without bias. Oh, wow. Look at there.
Yeah.
And then handling complaints and disputes under a fair and reasonable system. Now, let's say code-making panel 2, you want to submit and say, oh, we had a guy get killed, or a kid got killed, which was horrible. I hate that happened. But it wasn't due to the AC unit. It was due to the wiring. They did. The wiring method wasn't installed correctly, and therefore it wasn't able to send the ground fault current path back, and that's what happened. So you have to send something in here to have a complaint or dispute. Co-making panel 2 or nobody sent any disputes in on any of this. They just decided our findings are credible, which I will say this, your findings wasn't too credible, because when you went to the Standards Council, what you submitted, actually they told you didn't have technical merit. The one that had technical merit was actually done by the Association for the ACs and everything, and they actually went and did testing and everything, and guess which one did provide technical merit? Their TIA did it. It wasn't the one that was submitted by Co-making Panel 2. So
and I mean, Co-making Panel 2, they could have, submitted one of these complaints, and they might have actually put anti-slip things on the top of AC units.
Sure.
Just kidding.
Watch this. Now it gets in to what are the test standards. Okay.
Right.
So it says an appropriate test standard referred 1910.7B1I, which we looked at a while ago, into, is a document which specifies the safety requirements for specific equipment or class of equipment and is what? Recognized in the United States as a safety standard providing an adequate level of safety and compatible with and maintain current and periodic revisions of applicable. Listen. I, I can't be any more specific. Anybody watching this, revisions of applicable national codes and installation standards. Which
Okay.
which code and installation standard are they talking about? Would it happen to be the National Electrical Code?
I would think so.
Wow. I mean, if this is not in black and white, I mean, you can make up all the excuses in the world why you think the NEC overrides the manufacturer's instructions. And I'm stating here telling you that when they do these testing and everything on all this equipment, it tells you they're taking the National Electrical Code into consideration. But let's look at three. Developed by a standards developing organization under a method. Listen to this, providing for input and consideration of use. Watch what? Of industry groups, experts, users, consumers, governmental authorities, and others having broad experience in the safety field involved. Wow.
Wow. Oh, I thought
Unbelievable.
that the experts were telling us that the disconnect was an outlet, and we're supposed to just believe that and go with it.
Yeah. And then it says, in lieu of paragraphs C1, 2, and 3, the standard is currently designated as an ANSI standard, safety designated product standard, or an American Society for Testing and Materials, which is your ASTM test standard used for evaluation of products and materials. Look at that.
Wow. Wow.
Unbelievable. And I don't even need to go. I'll just do the implementation. E, here's last. A testing organization desiring recognition, look at this, by OSHA as a NERDL shall request that OSHA evaluate its testing and control programs against the requirements in this section for any equipment or material it may specify. The recognition procedure shall be conducted in accordance with Annex A to this section. I'm not going to get into all that. But what they're telling you here is that any equipment, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, has to go through what? Evaluation here. And OSHA
Okay.
is the one that does this.
Yeah. So, what you're gonna have to go through, Juan, like it's kind of it's kind of a touchy situation just for the fact, like, if you put a receptacle in a certain location, that receptacle requires GFCI protection. But if you have a piece of equipment and it says GFCI protection is not required when hardwired, then you can hardwire it and GFCI protection is not required. Like, that overrides what they're sitting there saying it's connected to an outlet, which is not.
Right. And then you pick up the very last thing, what is considered approved? It's acceptable to who? The authority enforcing this subpart. Now, if you go look at that, it says we got the definition of approved in what? Article 100, and it says acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction. So then they say the authority enforcing this subpart is Assistant Secretary for Occupational Safety and Health. The definition of acceptable indicates what is acceptable to the Assistant Secretary label and therefore approved within the meaning of this subpart. So now, hopefully,